I'm just stretching my shoulder joint. Now, we all know stretches and we all do stretches from time to time, and some people love doing stretches, and obviously we're stretching things to specifically target certain body parts or certain structures within body parts, and obviously stretching clearly has a physiological effect. What is that physiological effect though when we're stretching certain tissues? Today we're going to be looking at the shoulder joint, and actually more specifically the shoulder joint capsule. So the shoulder joint capsule is basically connective tissue around the joint. It kind of encases the joint and it thickens in areas to make ligaments and various things. So in, say, something like a frozen shoulder, this capsule becomes very restricted and tight, and therefore there are procedures where they do like hydrodilatations and capsular releases and manipulations under anesthetic, and the aim is to actually release that capsule, to lengthen that capsule out so it gives you your range of movement back. So obviously this means that you should think, well, should we stretch the capsule if we have a frozen shoulder or we have a bad shoulder and the shoulders become stiff? Are we actually stretching the capsule, which is obviously in these cases the underlying issue, or are we not actually stretching the capsule? Or more to the point, is that stretch of the capsule doing anything to that capsule? So here there was a study where they looked at joint capsules of the shoulder in cadavers. They looked at 12 different cadavers, and they were looking at what sort of forces were involved in actually getting a stretch, or what the capsule could tolerate, or what the capsule's capacity of load was. They actually measured maximal load, strength, and elasticity. They measured the 4 parts of each capsule, so it was the superior, inferior, anterior, and posterior, so basically the top, the bottom, the front, and the back. So what did they find? So they found actually the posterior part of the capsule, the back of the capsule, was the strongest part. And this is interesting because obviously this could be down to why there are less dislocations in a posterior direction, although obviously that can be down to the glenoid facing more anteriorly and it's harder to force it backwards. But it's interesting that it's stronger at that back, and there's got to be a good reason for that. The weakest part of the capsule was actually the inferior part, so the underneath part. And I would say this makes sense again because you're probably not going to be realistically loading that all the time, whereas the other areas you're more likely to through gravity and things. So if you're doing a stretch and you're thinking, right, I'm going to do a posterior capsular stretch, so like a sleeper stretch, or I'm going to mobilize the joint, we do know that these things give relief, they give more range of motion, they help pain, but do they actually stretch the capsule? Do they actually lengthen the capsule? And how much load are we actually putting on? Well, obviously when we do a stretch, probably not an awful lot of load when you consider, the grand scheme of what loads can be. So what they found in the study is the posterior part of the capsule actually had a maximum load capacity of 683 kilograms, which I would assume is going to be a lot greater than any mobilization or stretch is going to exert by a long way. So this means that if you're stretching thinking that you're going to lengthen that capsule by essentially loading it to that level, it's not going to match that level. Now, this obviously is a one-off kind of idea. Obviously, if you apply a stretch which isn't above a capacity, it may lengthen the tissue over a prolonged period of time. So there is that to be said about this study. It's not as simple as that. The other side is it's in cadavers, not live people, so that's another limitation of the study. And the other thing is that does it even matter what you're stretching as long as you're getting the desired outcome? So people could say, well, if it's that strong, what's the point in trying to stretch it and elongate it? Well, the reality is that if you do the stretches or if you do anything that gets movement and mobility, it will relax muscle. And of course, with these conditions with pain, there's always going to be muscle spasm. A sleeper stretch, if anything, like when I start doing a sleeper stretch, my range increases over the course of doing 10 to 15 repetitions of a sleeper stretch. And this means, well, that's definitely not capsular because it can't relax, it can't give you that amount of elongation. So therefore that's muscular. So that means the rotator cuff muscles are actually giving me more length. So obviously I'm going into internal rotation. So I'm stretching the external rotators predominantly. So this means that these stretches still have value. And we know this because people find them valuable. But if you're saying I'm doing this stretch to lengthen the capsule, it might not be true. However, cadavers will put a limit to this study, and also we think about that long-term effect of regular stretching to stimulate growth, even if you're not actually getting it to anything like capacity. But it was interesting to see how strong it was. That's what's very interesting with the study, showing that it's a hugely strong structure and obviously designed that way on purpose. It would be better if the anterior capsule was a bit stronger, I think, because a lot of dislocations happen anteriorly. But again, this is down to mechanics, down to hypermobility and various other things as well. But an interesting study nonetheless. Like I say, you can take what you want from it. It's not the be all and end all, but an interesting one anyway. Anyway, that's it for this video, and I'll see you next time.